I walked into my apartment, and there she was, lying on my bed as if the world had folded itself around her. The first thing I noticed was the faint scent of jasmine drifting in the air, a trace of her that somehow belonged here even though it shouldn't. My heart ticked a little faster, but I told myself to stay calm, to act like this wasn't extraordinary. She shifted slightly, her eyes lifting, slow and deliberate, catching mine across the room. She was graceful in a way that made the air itself hesitate, mid-40s, confident, with just a trace of vulnerability hidden beneath the curve of her smile. Every small movement of hers seemed intentional, but effortless, like she knew exactly how to draw attention without demanding it. I paused in the doorway, hand frozen on the doorknob, because I didn't want to break the spell. The apartment felt smaller with her there, the familiar corners suddenly intimate, the soft light catching the gold in her hair. My fingers brushed the doorframe and suddenly it felt like the distance between us was a physical ache I could almost touch. She propped herself on one elbow and tilted her head slightly, watching me as though she had been expecting me, but not really. Her hand rested near the edge of the bed, close enough that if I moved an inch, we'd brush fingers. The thought sent a shiver down my spine I couldn't quite explain. My voice caught before I could speak, so I cleared my throat and said nothing. Instead, I let my eyes linger on the way her wrist flexed, the faint tremor when she shifted her weight. The air smelled faintly of her perfume, warm and soft, and I realized that I was holding my breath. She smiled, not mockingly, not teasingly, but like she recognized the tension that had always been between us and decided to leave it unspoken. I started, then stopped. Words failed. She didn't move, didn't offer the escape of distraction. It was like she was daring me to speak, or not to. My palms itched, I wanted to reach out and touch the curve of her arm, but my hand stayed uselessly at my sides. She shifted again, closer this time, the fabric of her sweater brushing against mine. The tiniest contact, almost accidental, yet enough to set something in motion. Her gaze flicked down for a fraction of a second, then back up, and I could have sworn her chest rose just a bit faster. I swallowed, thinking I should laugh it off, say something about how impossible this all was. But my voice stuck somewhere in my throat, replaced by the quiet hum of the apartment, the distant city outside, the soft brush of her hair against the pillow. Every ordinary sound seemed magnified because she was here. She reached for a book on the nightstand, slow fingers grazing mine as she picked it up. A spark, subtle but undeniable, ran through my hand. Neither of us spoke. The silence was alive, dense, like it had its own weight. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words would have ruined it. Then, just as I thought I could bear it a moment longer, the soft click of the door down the hall made us both freeze. Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly, and mine shot toward the sound, heart thudding against my ribs. For a heartbeat, the entire room seemed to hold its breath with us. And in that suspended second, I realized, whatever was about to happen, nothing would be the same after this. The apartment felt impossibly quiet after that door click, the city's hum outside now distant, like it belonged to someone else. She set the book down with deliberate care, the tip of her finger brushing mine again, just long enough to make me think my pulse had betrayed me. I tried to pull back, but my body refused to obey. I remembered the first time I really noticed her, months ago, in the hallway. She had been carrying groceries, laughing at something a friend had said on the phone, and the way the sunlight caught her hair made my stomach twist with a strange, hollow ache. Back then, I had told myself it was admiration, nothing more. But standing here now, with her lying on my bed, I knew it had been something else all along, something I hadn't dared name. Her eyes flicked to mine again, and I caught a shadow there I hadn't seen before. She was careful, always careful, like every move could reveal a secret she wasn't ready to share. I imagined the weight she carried, divorced, children grown, a life that had somehow hardened her edges but left cracks that made her breathtaking. I could see it in the way she lingered at doorways, the faint tremor in her hands when she laughed too loudly, the way she sometimes stared at nothing as if it were someone she missed. "You live here alone?" she asked, voice soft, as if testing the air. Yes, I said, more quickly than intended. My words sounded brittle even to me. She smiled faintly, tilting her head. I thought you did. Her eyes traveled over me in a way that was casual on the surface but charged underneath. There was history here, unspoken, a mixture of curiosity and restraint. I shifted, trying to focus on anything else, the muted gold of the lamp, the rough fabric of the rug, but she leaned just a little closer. Her hand brushed against my shoulder as she reached for the book again, and the warmth of her skin lingered far longer than it should have. I told myself it was accidental. But when she leaned back, a subtle breath escaping as if she had noticed the effect she had, I couldn't help the shiver that ran down my spine. There was a risk in this, and I knew it. Everyone would see it differently, neighbors whispering, friends shaking their heads, the impossible gap between our ages like a visible line drawn in chalk. And yet, here we were. Every inch she came closer, every faint smile, felt like stepping onto a tightrope I both wanted and feared to walk. You're quiet tonight, she murmured, and I realized she had read me without a single word. The faint scent of jasmine trailed her movements again, making the apartment feel warmer, more intimate. I opened my mouth to answer, but the words dissolved into the hum of my own thoughts. Instead, I watched her hand rest against the edge of the bed, poised yet hesitant. She lingered near, just enough for our thighs to almost touch, and I could feel the electric anticipation in the air. Her breath brushed against my ear as she leaned slightly forward to reach a pillow, and I swallowed hard, trying not to betray how acutely aware I was of her. And then, as if drawn by the same invisible current, our hands met again, this time neither of us pulling away immediately. Our fingers brushed, entwined for a moment that felt suspended outside of time. She didn't speak, and neither did I. The silence became a language of its own, a confession neither of us dared voice. I felt something shift, unspoken but undeniable. A closeness that had always hovered between us now pressed firmly into the present. My chest ached, not with fear, not yet, but with a strange, intoxicating clarity. And in that touch, so fleeting, so light, it felt like the entire world had narrowed down to just us, two flawed, human beings suspended in a delicate tension that neither wanted to end. The quiet between us had grown heavy, thick as the dim light spilling across the carpet. My fingers were still tangled, briefly, in hers, and every heartbeat felt magnified in the hush of the apartment. I wanted to pull back, to remind myself this was impossible, but the closer she leaned, the harder it was to obey reason. A sudden buzz from my phone startled me, sharp against the tension. I yanked it up, heart hammering, and saw a message from a friend I hadn't replied to. My thumb hovered over the screen, suddenly aware of how intimate the moment was, how delicate the space between us had become. She watched me, eyebrows slightly raised, lips parting as if she wanted to comment but didn't. The silence stretched, electric, and I realized how exposed I felt, not to the world outside, but to her, to the intensity of her gaze. Every subtle gesture she made, the tilt of her head, the way she traced a line on the bedspread with her finger, felt like a deliberate test, like she was daring me to step closer or retreat. I tried to focus elsewhere, but the warmth of her shoulder near mine, the way her hair brushed against my neck when she shifted, made it impossible. My chest tightened, and I could feel her breath just slightly against my skin. A laugh, soft and low, escaped her lips, and I felt it in my bones, somewhere between warning and invitation. A knock on the door startled us both. I jumped, instinctively turning toward it, and she shifted away, suddenly proper, controlled, like she had never been lying across my bed just moments ago. I opened the door to find nobody there, just the hallway quiet and empty, but by the time I turned back, she was sitting upright, poised, a faint flush on her cheeks. We both exhaled, not saying a word. The moment had changed, though neither of us admitted it. My hand brushed against hers again, this time lingering longer despite the caution screaming in my mind. Every glance was a negotiation, how close we could get without crossing the line, how much longing we could allow before it became too dangerous. Her eyes caught mine, unwavering, and I felt my resolve slip. I leaned forward slightly, caught in the pull of something neither of us could fully name. She didn't retreat this time, her hand resting lightly on my forearm, fingers brushing against the fine hairs there. The world outside the apartment ceased to exist for a heartbeat. I could almost taste her, close enough that the faint scent of jasmine and warm skin mixed in my senses, but the almost kiss hovered in the air, a delicate, maddening pause. The rules, the risk, the age gap, the quiet judgment of the world outside, everything whispered that we shouldn't. And yet, the gravity between us pressed harder than reason ever could. I tried to speak, to break the tension with words, but they failed me. Instead, we stayed frozen, inches apart, our foreheads almost brushing, the subtle rise and fall of her breath syncing with my own. Every instinct screamed to pull back, to resist, yet we remained suspended, closer than ever, bound by a quiet, undeniable force. And in that moment, so fragile, so charged, I realized that we were no longer pretending. Whatever hesitation lingered had been swallowed by the weight of proximity, by the small, shivering electricity of touch, by the near confession of lips not yet meeting but aching to. I felt it before I even realized it, an ache, a pull that had been simmering beneath the quiet for weeks, now sharp and urgent. She sat across from me on the couch, knees drawn up, fingers fiddling with the edge of her sleeve, but her eyes were fixed on me with an intensity one could no longer ignore. "Why are you looking at me like that?" I asked, voice low, uneven. She hesitated, a faint tremor in her lips. "Because, you see me," she whispered, almost too softly to hear. And suddenly the room felt smaller, tighter, the space between us electric. Every sound, the hum of the radiator, the distant traffic, my own heartbeat, amplified the tension. I leaned forward without thinking, fingers brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. She didn't move, didn't pull away. Her cheek pressed ever so slightly against my hand, warm and soft, and my chest tightened as if it couldn't contain itself. The distance we'd been dancing around vanished in an instant, replaced by the undeniable weight of desire and fear intertwined. We shouldn't, I murmured, voice barely audible. But she tilted her head, lips parted slightly, eyes dark with something I couldn't name, longing, worry, maybe guilt, maybe hope. Her hand found mine, gripping it in a way that was almost desperate, and I realized she felt it too, the gravity, the pull, the impossibility of what we were doing. She was older, wiser, yet something fragile shone in her eyes, something I wanted to protect and consume at the same time. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. I can't stop thinking about you," I confessed, voice shaking. The words were reckless, raw, and I immediately wished I could take them back, but she didn't recoil. She only let her forehead rest against mine, eyes closing for a heartbeat, as if absorbing the weight of what I'd said. The air between us hummed. Her hair brushed my lips when I leaned in, a scent of jasmine and warmth that made my pulse spike. Every nerve in my body screamed for more, for proximity, for the impossible. I wanted to say her name, to trace the curve of her jaw with my fingertips, but even the simplest move felt monumental. And then, she whispered, almost as if testing herself, "Do you even realize what this is?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure I fully did. The truth was in the way my hand trembled where it touched hers, in the way my breath hitched when she leaned closer, in the small, aching distance we refused to cross. We were teetering on the edge of something irreversible, a line neither of us could ignore any longer. I drew her slightly closer, enough that I could feel the warmth of her body, the soft pressure of her shoulder against mine. The tension was unbearable, the moment stretched taut like a string ready to snap. I could feel her heartbeat against my chest, rapid, uncertain, but in rhythm with mine. "Don't," she breathed, almost a warning, almost an invitation. Our lips were so close I could feel the faint warmth, the soft brush of air, the undeniable pull that had brought us to this point. Every instinct screamed forward, yet the weight of everything, consequences, age, fear, held us suspended. Then, in that heartbeat between desire and restraint, the world seemed to wait with us. And just as my lips hovered over hers, the front door clicked open downstairs. The apartment felt impossibly still after the door downstairs had clicked shut, yet the silence wasn't comforting. It was sharp, a knife edge that made every breath and heartbeat seem louder than it should. I had leaned closer to her, just an inch, my lips hovering, when a sudden ping from her phone broke the spell. She glanced at it, eyes widening ever so slightly. I followed her gaze and saw a message preview lighting up the screen. "I need to talk. About you and him." Her hand froze midair, trembling faintly. She didn't look at me at first, just stared at the message, fingers brushing against her lips as if seeking answers there. The warmth that had been building between us shifted, became heavier, almost dangerous. The apartment, once intimate and safe, now felt like it had walls closing in. "What? Who?" I asked, my voice tight, betraying more than I intended. She finally looked up, eyes locking on mine. "It's my ex," she said, voice low, almost a whisper. The words should have been simple, but the way her throat tightened, the way she fidgeted with the sleeve of her sweater, made them anything but. "He knows, he might suspect." I felt my stomach drop, not just with fear, but with a jolt of possessive, unreasoned jealousy. I wanted to step closer, to protect her, to claim the closeness we'd almost dared to cross, but my hands froze. The air between us was charged, fragile, and somehow frightening. Her gaze softened, and she took a tentative step toward me, then stopped, the distance between us heavier than before. Our fingers brushed again accidentally as she shifted her weight. A spark jumped through me, sharp and consuming, and I realized how desperately I wanted her, even in the shadow of risk. "You," I began, voice hoarse, but she held up a hand, stopping me mid-word. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, and the scent of jasmine seemed sharper now, intoxicating in the tension. "I didn't want to tell you," she admitted, eyes flitting to mine with a vulnerability that made my heart lurch. "But if I don't, it'll be worse. I care too much." The words, soft and trembling, wrapped around me. I felt her pulse through the thin fabric of her sleeve as my fingers brushed her wrist, the subtle warmth of her body so close it was almost unbearable. My breath hitched. I wanted to close the distance, to kiss her, to erase the danger and fear with a single motion. Instead, we stayed suspended, inches apart, every nerve alight with the knowledge that what had felt safe before now carried consequences we couldn't ignore. I could feel her shoulder pressing lightly against mine, her hair brushing my neck in a way that set me on edge. We were caught between desire and fear, between wanting and knowing we should pause. I faltered, hand hovering near hers, unsure if I should reach or retreat. Every instinct pulled me forward, yet the reality of risk made me hesitate. My pulse thumped in my ears. She exhaled slowly, a soft, trembling sigh, and leaned just slightly toward me, not enough to close the gap, but enough that our breaths mingled, warm and quick. The unspoken admission of her feelings, the fragile threat of exposure, made the air between us almost unbearable. And then, after a long, suspended moment, she made the decision for both of us. She stepped closer, brushing past me so deliberately that our bodies almost touched, and whispered, "We can't stop this, not anymore." My chest tightened, and for the first time, fear and desire fused into one, an undeniable, reckless certainty. The edge of the inevitable had arrived. The apartment seemed to shrink around us, the dim light wrapping us in a cocoon of quiet tension. My hand hovered near hers, trembling slightly, unsure if I should take the step that would erase weeks of hesitation, or retreat and leave everything unspoken. She watched me, eyes wide, breath catching in the small space between us. "I don't know if we can," I whispered, voice low, almost lost in the hum of the radiator. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she took a slow step closer, closing the gap just enough for our knees to brush. I could feel the warmth of her body, the soft weight of her hand lingering near mine, every subtle movement making it impossible to think clearly. My chest tightened, heart hammering with both fear and longing. "You can," she murmured, barely audible, leaning slightly so her shoulder touched mine. The contact sent a shiver through me, sharp, urgent, but not overwhelming, enough to make every nerve stand on end. Her hair brushed my neck as she adjusted her posture, a simple gesture loaded with intent, and I realized that the choice had been made for both of us in that small, suspended moment. I closed the distance, fingertips brushing her hand before entwining with hers. She didn't pull back, she leaned into me, the faint tremor in her fingers matching the tremor in my own. The air was thick with anticipation, every inhalation tasting of warmth, jasmine, and something unnameable but utterly hers. We stayed like that, suspended on the edge of a decision neither of us had fully dared to voice. My forehead rested near hers, breaths mingling, every sound, the quiet click of the radiator, the distant city, sharpened into clarity by the intensity of proximity. She tilted her head slightly, lips parted in a silent question I already knew the answer to. "I've wanted this," I confessed, voice rough and raw. "For longer than I should have." Her eyes glimmered with something between relief and vulnerability. "Me too," she said, voice soft, almost breaking. "I was scared. But I can't hide it anymore." The words were enough. Enough to erase hesitation, enough to dissolve fear. Our bodies pressed closer, not yet in a kiss, but in a closeness that felt more intimate than anything else in my life. Every brush of her hand, every slight tilt toward me, communicated more than words could. I realized I had never truly known how complete it could feel to be seen, truly seen, by someone I wanted so fiercely. I rested my hands lightly on her waist, feeling the subtle warmth, the steady pulse beneath the fabric of her sweater. She leaned further into me, resting her head briefly against my chest, and I could hear her heartbeat, rapid but steady, matching the rhythm of my own. The weight of weeks of longing, fear, and unspoken desire dissolved in that small, electric space. And then, with a quiet courage, she lifted her face just slightly, lips inches from mine. My breath caught, and for the first time in weeks, I stopped overthinking. I let instinct take over, cupping her cheek gently, feeling the softness of her skin, the warmth of her gaze locked on mine. We didn't speak again. The world narrowed to that inch of air between us, taut with anticipation, trembling with possibility. And in that suspended moment, it didn't matter who we were outside this apartment, or what anyone else would think. It only mattered that we had chosen each other, fully and recklessly, at last. Everything else, the fear, the risks, the hesitation, faded. We understood each other completely now, down to the tiniest brush of fingers, the soft inhale of shared breath, the quiet surrender of two hearts refusing to wait any longer. The apartment finally felt like ours, not just a space, but a refuge. The tension that had hovered for weeks, the almost edges of desire and hesitation, had settled into something warmer, quieter, undeniably real. She leaned back against the couch, and I followed, sitting beside her so close our thighs touched. It wasn't just physical, it was a deliberate, intimate closeness that spoke volumes. Her hand found mine, fingers interlacing naturally, as if they had always known where to belong. I held it gently, squeezing lightly, and felt her squeeze back, subtle but grounding. "You really are here," she whispered, resting her forehead against mine. Her breath was soft, the faint jasmine lingering still, and I let myself inhale it fully. There was no rush now, no urgent pull to cross lines, we were simply together, savoring the moment, letting the world exist elsewhere for just a while. I brushed a stray lock of hair from her face, feeling the warmth of her skin against my fingertips. She tilted her head toward my hand, eyes closing briefly, and I realized how long I had wanted this, the simple permission to be near her without fear or hesitation. I was scared, she admitted quietly, voice trembling in a way that made me ache to protect her. About all of it. About us. I shook my head gently, keeping my forehead pressed against hers. We were scared. That's normal. But I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. She smiled faintly, a mix of relief and lingering vulnerability. You really mean that? Completely, I said, letting the truth sink into every small touch, every lingering glance. I've wanted you, more than I thought I could ever say. A soft laugh escaped her lips, almost a sigh, and she leaned into me fully this time, resting her head against my shoulder. I wrapped an arm around her, holding her gently yet possessively, feeling her weight settle against me, feeling the slow, steady rise and fall of her breathing. It was imperfect, messy, human, and exactly how it should be. We stayed like that for a long while, no words necessary, just the quiet intimacy of shared warmth. The age gap, the fears, the judgment of the world outside, none of it mattered here. We were together, fully present, fully chosen, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. When she lifted her face again, brushing her lips briefly against my temple in a soft, fleeting kiss, I felt a gentle certainty settle in my chest. This wasn't a perfect fairy tale, it was better. It was real. I rested my hand over hers, squeezing lightly, and whispered, "I'm glad it's you." She smiled, leaning closer once more, her forehead touching mine, eyes closed in a quiet, shared moment of peace. "Me too," she said, voice soft, intimate, and full of meaning. And in that small, still apartment, with hands intertwined, breaths mingling, and hearts finally unguarded, we understood one another completely. The story wasn't over, it had just begun, but for now, it felt enough.